it will look like. We'll be starting first with an icebreaker where we'll show a video on the flooding in Nigeria. And then we expect, and she's here, Dr. Renee from the WCAP's Headquarters Climate Change Working Group, who will be giving us an overview, just a brief overview of the Climate Change Working Group and what they've been doing. And then we'll call on our panelists. The first panelist, Abdul Majid Abubakar, who is a climate activist from northern part of Nigeria, and who will be discussing the climate impacts with respect to the recent flooding in Nigeria. And then Dr. Chidima will speak about climate impacts observed in southern part of Nigeria. And we're expecting our third panelist, Diana Rose Oma, who is the program coordinator for the Horn of Africa Youth Network. We expect her to give us a brief overview of the impacts of climate change in the Horn of Africa and what roles youth can play in strategies for adaptation and mitigation. After our panelists talk, we want to throw the session open for an interactive discussion where we'll expect our participants to also give their view, and then we'll also give about 10 minutes for Q&A and final comments by the Executive Director of WCAPS, Dr. Malika Glover, and then we'll do a bit of announcements and where we share information about the next panel and how everything will go, and then we'll close for the day. And we're hoping that we could do all of this in 1 hour 30 minutes. Hopefully, if we keep to time, we should be able to do that. Before, I don't have the citation of Dr. Renee from WCAPS, so I would call upon her to give her own introduction and then give her a talk. So I will hand over to Dr. Renee. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Shortly. Sorry, yes. I speak without opening my camera. I forgot.
Yep, I'm actually on the webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Renee Stout. I'm a PhD candidate at the American Graduate School in Paris. I'm studying international relations and diplomacy, and I'm focusing my research on the West's impact with their climate security and the impact that that's had on the global South, particularly in Africa when we look at critical minerals. I'm also part of the leadership team for the WCAPS Climate Change Working Group. So I'll just give a very quick overview of our mission and our focus, specifically what we believe and why it's important, obviously, to fight against climate change. So to start, we know that climate change doesn't discriminate. And when you're watching the news, you see events happening from all around the world. And whether you think you're impacted or not, chances are that you probably are, or that you will be sometime in the future. And research shows that these impacts disproportionately affect people differently across socioeconomic structures. And that impact largely affects indigenous and lower income communities, also coastal cities, rural towns, and villages. However, the major consequence that we see with climate change largely is gendered. The impact we see affects women across all socioeconomic structures. And these climate change related events that we see also have an increase in gender-based violence. Women are usually the first to lose their assets in the community. There's usually an increase in care responsibilities that largely fall on the women in the household. And when the allocation of resources comes from different organizations, it's also very gendered, and those resources are also very limited within those households. So climate change reinforces restrictive gender norms and the stereotypes that come with it. And because climate change is a threat multiplier, as a working group, we aim to develop awareness of these issues that affect vulnerable communities the most. And so when we see that main destruction that happens with the climate-related event, we have to be aware of the aftermath that occurs months or years after, especially when we're looking at the living conditions and livelihoods of vulnerable populations. And these events really exacerbate issues that these communities are often already facing, like internal displacement and economic and political conflict. So our climate change working group aims to put these communities at the forefront of adaptation and mitigation strategies. And when we center these community-based solutions, it's best because they have the solution to build resilience toward climate change and its effects. Because these communities are often the least responsible, and yet they're the most impacted, and they're also the ones that don't receive the necessary economic and industrial support to adapt, mitigate, or combat climate change in their own communities. So when we shift our focus to these communities, we showcase that yes, they know best how to take care of their community, and they know best how to utilize resources efficiently and effectively, sometimes better than international organizations that are allocating those resources. So the climate change working group's mission is to create a space in the climate sector that is more accessible for women of color and marginalized communities to partake in climate-related discussions and initiatives. And we do that through our webinars, fireside chats, research articles, blog posts. Coming soon, we have a big conference that we're hosting online that you can join us as well. So we aim to be a platform to discuss those climate-related issues and build a network where these big organizations and experts in the field can work together with these communities to share their solutions and understand how best to save and heal our planet. So that's just a brief summary. And if you're interested in learning more or joining us, or you have your own ideas that you wish to share, feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to connect with anyone that is interested. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Renee. That's a brilliant takeaway from what you have said: community solutions, building resilience, and then we have to remember, always remember, the communities know what is best for them. And I think that is one thing we'll need to put at the back of our mind whenever we're going to do any interventions. I missed a step when I called upon you, but I'm very happy that what you have said also actually served as an icebreaker. But before I move to the next, the panelists, we'll be talking about Nigeria. We want to give a brief video to let everyone see exactly what we're talking about when we talk about flood in Nigeria. I'll ask Kadonia, please, to help us share that video.
UNICEF has released a report warning more than 2.5 million people in Nigeria are in need of humanitarian assistance. 60% of them are children and are at increased risk of waterborne diseases and malnutrition due to the most severe flooding in the past decade. Rainfall is expected to continue for several weeks. Humanitarian needs are also expected to rise. Here's a report from Nigeria.
Nigeria recently experienced its worst ever floods in decades. Experts say that these devastating floods are the result of human activity that is exacerbating the climate change. According to a UN report, floods in Nigeria have affected over 3.2 million people, while over 1.4 million are still displaced. The UN report says that flooding that ravaged 34 states in the country can increase the risk of waterborne diseases. The international body has further said that 4.1 million people are at a risk of experiencing severe food insecurity, and 1.74 million children under 5 are projected to suffer from acute malnutrition in 2022.
This year flood is too much. So we used to enter our building, things are just sabotaged and everything spoiled. So our children, we can manage the water. Anyhow, the water penetrates, we can manage it till the flood go back.
The government officials say that the UN data could be underestimated and the scale of devastation could be even bigger. They admit that immediate actions is needed to stop future disasters associated with flooding, and African leaders must stand united in confronting the West on the effects of global warming.
For now, it was very, very bad. You know, in some areas of the state, it was worse than others. You know, in some areas, it covered the houses to the top. In some areas, it covered the houses to the window level. While some areas are closer to the road, it's just, what's in the compound and on the roadside. So basically, it was very bad. A lot of people were displaced.
Experts say that a number of factors are responsible for the devastation. The above average rainfall due to global warming, overflowing dam in neighboring Cameroon, and poor drainage infrastructure in the country resulted in the recent floods. According to the United Nations, seasonal rains and floods are severely impacting countries in the West and Central Africa.
Beyond the fact that we have global warming and other challenges, we believe that when the needful is done on the part of the federal government and even some of the state governments, especially in the area of clearing of channels, canals, a lot of those water, like I said, will be absorbed, and it will create the needed solution to a very large extent of the problem.
We're in the Khoi community of Lagos, Nigeria, where some Nigerians are still grappling with the losses that accompanied the flood. Well, this year's flood has been described as the worst in decades, even as the international community have warned of more disasters that might accompany the flooding, like food insecurity, increase in the number of displaced persons, and diseases that accompany flood situations like this. They've called on both public and private partners to offer help to victims of the flood as it recedes. From Lagos, Nigeria, Louisa Olani Wion, World is One.
2.5 million affected, 34 out of the 36 states of Nigeria, 60% children, sickness, diseases, 3.4 million displaced, 200,000 houses damaged. Grim statistics. So with this, we'll hear from the first panelist. What happened? What is the situation like? What impact we witnessed in the northern part of Nigeria? Before I call on Abdulmajid Abubakar, I will read briefly his citation. Abdulmajid Abubakar is a climate activist, an environmentalist, and a natural resource manager from Nigeria. He is the founder and project coordinator of Eyes on the Environment Initiative, which is a youth-led organization championing for sustainable future. He has interest in rural livelihood, climate change, environmental sustainability, a better life for women and children, as well as equal opportunity and quality education for all. I know that he's been doing a lot of advocacy and also creating awareness about what is the source of the flood. So I will hand over to Abdulmajid to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Papa. As I was introduced, my name is Abdulmajid Abubakar. I am a climate activist from the northern part of Nigeria. And actually, my journey started when I was a student. In my own part of the country, 90% of us engage in agricultural activities, and most of it is rain-fed agriculture. So when I was a student, I took a loan to invest in rice farming, and I might hitch a lot of money because I started when it got into rain-fed agriculture. And unfortunately, flood water washed away everything, leaving me with nothing. And as a student, I had to pay back the loan. So this is very difficult for me. And this my story is the story of thousands of young people in Nigeria that doesn't want to engage in other criminal activities and to put. As I was saying, almost 90% of us are farmers. So I lost everything to flooding. So this is the story of so many thousands of youth in the northern part of Nigeria that doesn't want to engage themselves in other criminal activities in order to earn a living. So that is why I engage into climate activism to bring about change, the change I want, because I don't want what happened to me to happen to so many children, the generation get unborn. 2012 was time to be the worst in 40 years when it comes to flooding. In my location alone, in my state alone, we have 27 local governments. In 2012, about 4 local governments were affected by flooding. You see, the miracle does not end there because the about 17 of them were affected by flooding. 17 of them. In 2012, that was termed as the worst. It used to be 4 local governments, which my farmland was included. But in 2020, last year, it occupied 17 local governments out of the 27 local governments, and over 3.5 million Nigerians were displaced. In my own state alone, farming communities that happens to be feeding the nation and the neighboring countries like Niger and the likes were all engulfed by flood, making them into fragile island. To my dismay, what bothers me the most, the victim. The victim happens to be the elderly people, women and girls, because most of us are out there in the cities looking for a greener pasture, leaving them behind. So whenever this flood comes about, they will be drowned in water, there will be waterborne diseases, and so many gender-based violence, because you end up seeing the girls and the women living in a temporary camp. Some are uncompleted buildings, some are schools, primary schools. So them living there together with, in the midst of so many people, expose them to so many dangers. So this is what bothers me the most. I used to say, it is not all about losing the farmland or losing our livelihoods, but what we the youths and the government needs to look into consideration is the mental health of the victims, because after flooding, they will experience so many mental issues within their heads. And in my own part of the country, we are very poor. We are subject to poverty, and this has to do with the flooding and the climate change at large. And we're also left behind when it comes to education, the Western education. So you'll find out during the flooding, most of our primary schools, where our sisters and our children normally go to school, they are all be given out as internally displaced camps. So you see, our children will also be left behind, will not be going back to school until we have a permanent site that will keep these victims. So you see, the main point is like our women, our girls are suffered the most. They are the one experiencing this particular serious issue, and as I was saying, we feed the nation because we are farming communities. So this brought about
food insecurity, and this brought about all other like the social biases that are having, be it banditry and what have you, because there is no food to eat. A hungry man, they said it's evil. So this is where you see like all those, there's conflict between herders and farmers, there's conflict between one community and the other, all because of these scarce resources. And if you look at the prediction this year, they said between July to June, the northern part of the country will experience drought, dry spell, and which we experienced it. And we experienced it for what? For 3 weeks. So this dry spell, it's automatically telling us that our yield will be low this year. And God forbid, they also said that between October to November, almost 36, all the 36 states of the federation will undergo flooding. Before it used to be 11 states. Then last year it was 34 out of 36. But this year the prediction will be 36 out of 36 states will be submerged by flooding. So this is terrible. And my problem is the young girls, the women, and the children, because they are the most vulnerable and they are the victim. I used to be the victim, but not anymore, because when I was hit, I felt bad, I cried, and I suffered a lot. But I am a man. But to the ladies, to the girls, that is my own problem, and their mental health needs to be revisited. Whenever we went for engagement, advocacy campaign, people don't tend to understand what the Paris Agreement is. The 1.5 degree that we're saying that we shouldn't accept it. People don't tend to understand that. And I used to tell them, what it means is the flooding we are experiencing at the moment, it means times 2 of it. The drought, the heat waves, it means times 2 of it. Because if you look at it, 40 years back, they said in 2012, it used to be the worst, affecting only 11 states. But look at what happened last year. We have 36 states and 34 of them are affected by flooding. So this is what is happening in the northern part of the country, which is mainly agricultural income states. Our foodstuffs were declining because flooding is washing away everything. And we are also the cause of the problem. If you look at it, there's what we call the Hadej Jama'ar River Basin, which covers 5 northern states from Kano, Jigawa, Yobe, Bauchi, Yobe, Maiduguri, up to the Lake Chad. But if you look at it, in my state, Jigawa alone, a study said that since 1991, our rivers were never desilted. And there's tapa grass there. And I keep telling people, like, we used to see this issue as a regional issue, not only your state, because if Jigawa will desilt the river, Kano will not desilt, Yobe will not desilt, then Jigawa will also be below sea level. Then the water will come and also submerge us. So our states need to see it as a regional issue, work together, desilt the rivers. And part of it, the government are also like there's no political will. Why do I say there's no political will? You'll see, like, and the Tiga Dam was constructed for the purposes of irrigation. They use it as a dam that will supply irrigation water for 66,000 hectares. And as at now, we only have 24,000 hectares on ground. And that particular dam will save the water for that 66,000 hectares. And when the water is full, they just release it and it will come down to our farmlands, leaving us helpless. So this is like so many. This is so disturbing. This is what is happening in the other part of Nigeria, and we need to work hard. We need to bring up enlightenment. We need to bring out solution. And I am optimistic. Like this climate crisis, we can handle it. But when we need to speed up, We need to do it now. That is why I engaged into activism nationally and internationally. I was a part of the youths that push for the loss and damage funds, because I am also a victim of loss and damage, because I'm still yet to pay that loan I took when I was a student and engaged into the farming activity. So I think the youth and the government and the international communities needs to come to our aid, because it's no news that we Africans, we are releasing barely 4% of the greenhouse gases emission, but we are at the receiving end. We're into farming, and our farmlands we're losing them year in, year out. We are faced with food insecurity and conflict insecurities and gender-based violence at the order of the day in the northern part of Nigeria, and this has to do with the flooding we are experiencing each and every year. I think I'll stop here. If there's maybe the room to talk later, then maybe I'll chip in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Abdulmajid, for that presentation. In the northern part of Nigeria, being an agrarian community, the food basket, and with flooding, the farmers cannot farm, and this has spiraled. One of the impacts of this is the spiral leading into banditry, into kidnapping, and then a myriad of social consequences. These are things that we really need to bring to the forefront and see what we're going to do in order to adapt and or mitigate and adapt. And one of the final programs we'll be doing on this series, the climate panels, is that we would be finally bringing everything together, and then we'll brainstorm on what would be the strategies for adaptations and mitigations. But I agree with you, and I like that quote. We need to speed up, and we need to do it now. Thank you very much. And people will be putting questions in the chat box. Please, in the Q&A, please put your questions. And at the end of with the panel, we'll have the Q&A, and then we'll answer. And then don't forget that we have interactive discussions where we'll be able to get more insights from everyone. So with this, I would like to call on the next panelist, Dr. Chidinma Antoni-Azike. Dr. Chidinma has, I think she has some slides to share. I'll try to see if I can help her share if she doesn't share it. But before then, let me tell you a little bit about Chidinma. Chidinma is a researcher in the Department of Medical Laboratory Sciences in the Rivers State University in Nigeria. Rivers State is one of the 36 states of Nigeria. She obtained her first degree in medical laboratory science and an MSc and a PhD with distinction in medical microbiology. She is certified by the International Federation of Biosafety Association in biorisk management. Chidinma has attended several conferences where she presented papers on issues concerning infectious diseases, laboratory safety, and biosecurity. As a researcher, she has published over 20 scientific papers in both local and international journals. She belongs to the Association of Medical Laboratory Scientists of Nigeria, the Nigerian Biological Safety Association, the Nigeria Environmental Society, and the American Society of Microbiology. Welcome, Dr. Chidinma. You have the floor, but let me see if I have your slides. I can help you share. Sorry, please just give me a moment while I get her. Okay. Okay. I thought you would be able. Let me see. Let me see if I have it. I will download it. Yet. Okay. Okay. I don't know. It's sharing. Okay.
All right.
I think I got it. Yeah, it's okay, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Rabia. Good evening, all.
Yeah, good evening.
Okay. I am here to share some impacts of climate changes as observed in southern Nigeria. Please give me the next slide.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Maybe no need going back to define what climate change is, as the first person has already said a lot about it. But it's important that we know what causes this climate change. Then, southern Nigeria, which part of the country or part of Nigeria is regarded as southern Nigeria? That will help us to know the areas we are paying attention to. Under southern Nigeria, we have, out of 36 states, 19 are northern states, while 17 are southern states. Then we'll have south-south, southeast, and southwest.
Okay.
Then thank you. This is the map of Nigeria indicating the southern part of the country and the area, you can see the southwest, which includes the Lagos, the Ondo, the Oyo, Ekiti, Ogun. They will have the south-south, which has 5 states, the Anambra, Abia, Imo State, Enugu, and Ebonyi. Then we have south-south, consisting of Akwa Ibom, Bayelsa, Cross River, Edo, River State. So these are the southern part of the country that we want to look at the impacts of climate change on them. Ordinarily, we've been talking about climate change, and it will interest you to know that some persons might not really understand what we mean by climate change. Climate generally is just the weather condition of a place for a specified period of time, long-term weather condition. Then when we say climate change, it means that there is now variation in the weather condition of a particular place as a result of long-term effects of some activities or effects as a result of both human activity and the natural changes that occur for a period of time. And sometimes we misunderstand or we use interchangeably climate change and the global warming. They are two different things. Global warming is just an aspect of climate change, or one of the example of climate change as a result of increased temperature due to greenhouse gases, increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases. Now, what are the impacts of climate change in the southern part of Nigeria? The difference may not be much from the one experienced in northern, but because of the peculiarities we have in southern Nigeria. In southern Nigeria, we experience high temperatures that lead to heat waves and the decreased agricultural productivity. This high temperature can contribute to health issues. Then, and as a result of the nature of the environment will have impact such as increased flooding, erosion, biodiversity loss, livelihood challenges, poor yield of agricultural products, conflict and migration, and the other effects. All right, please go back to the last slide. The first slide on flood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Next,
Is it this one? Okay, the next one. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is one of the flood issue we experience in southern part of the country. Since 2012, when we had the most serious flood issues recorded in the history of our country, from that 2012 till now, it has been very devastating, especially in the southern part of the country, southern part of Nigeria. If you look at that picture, you will see a house almost completely submerged by flood. And you now imagine what happened to the properties inside this house, the human beings that are living there. Where would they go to? The plants, the agricultural, the farms, the animals in that surrounding. What happened to them? This is one of the effects of or impact of climate change as a result of increase in level of sea or rise in sea level that will lead to flood overtaking our surrounding and submerging houses, destroying properties, and causing loss of lives. So many persons are displaced. Some houses were completely submerged, while some, like this one, we are looking at this picture, you can't even enter into the house again because there is no way to enter inside the house. So one of the problems of this increased flooding is that because of the intense frequent rainfalls as a result of climate change, the flooding is much. And again, the most states in the southern part of the country, like in Niger Delta, has this flat topography and the poor drainage system that lead to increase in flooding impacts, thereby displacing communities, damaging infrastructure, and disrupting livelihood. Next slide, please. Yes, this is a case of erosion, gully erosion in the southeastern part of the country. The first picture is what we're experiencing in Imo State. Some part of a local government in Imo State, Idato South and Idato North. If you look at that floor, if you look at that gully erosion, you will discover that some houses are already falling inside. So many persons have been displaced, about more than 10 communities now. They cannot come out. Transportation is made difficult because as we are moving from maybe River State to Anambra State, Enugu, or going to Onitsha, this place we are looking at is one of the strategic routes connecting Imo State to other neighboring states. And you see that erosion has destroyed the road, continuation of the movement is disrupted, and the houses. Now, what happened to people living in this community? They will not have access to food. They will not have access to even a health facility. They won't have access to market except the local one. Whatever that is not produced within that community, they will not have. It will be difficult for them to have access to it because there is no way to get to another neighboring community or neighboring state to get this thing, except they have to take a longer route. So it's quite unfortunate. And the worst is that the government is not really paying serious attention to it. Or, okay, just last month, there was a report that some committee have been set up to look at what will happen or how they will mitigate this gully erosion in this part of Imo State. But unfortunately, the thing is too big that they don't even know where to start from. So when the impact of climate change gets to a very severe state, it becomes difficult to manage. So when you look at this gully erosion now, I don't know how long it will take for us, because the land itself, the soil, is now very soft. And you and I know how much the millions of naira that will go into this for us to be able to get it back to the original state or the normal state before this present state. Please, next slide. Gully erosion too is also not affecting only the southeast part of the country, even the south, like in Benin, Edo City. The second slide we saw, the second gully erosion, was experienced in 2001 in the University of Benin and the neighboring communities. You can see how the road is divided and so many houses were affected. Then another impact of climate change is biodiversity loss. Southern Nigeria have diverse ecosystems, including mangroves, rainforests, and all these are at risk due to rising temperature, deforestation, habitat destruction that threaten plants and animal species. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you. The next one, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
The next impact is the impact on livelihood challenges. When flood, for instance, cover the whole farm and farmers are not able to have access to their farm, what happens? We observe that the farm produce will reduce, agricultural yield will reduce, people will be exposed to hunger.
Recording in progress.
When you look at the right part, the upper part of the picture we are looking at, you see is a farm submerged by flood. And it is obvious that the plants grown in this farm, they will not make it. They're already dying, they're changing in color. And the human beings are affected with scarcity of food. Then we look at the left side of it, we can see for covering road that even movement of vehicles become difficult. So in this case, how do we transport food? Or how do we move from one community to another? It will definitely affect economic situation in the states that are being affected by the flood. We also see a lot of persons trying to move from a less stable environment to an environment that is more stable in the pursuit of a greener pasture in order to survive. So livelihood challenges is really, really enormous as a result of climate change, because once the normal weather condition is no longer the way it used to be, it becomes difficult. Now, as we are experiencing presently in River State, you find out that you cannot even differentiate the rainy season from dry season again. It's raining almost every day, all through. Now, the farmers who are here, what do? It becomes difficult. The plants that do well in dry season, it means that those plants will be scarce because we won't cultivate them. Then the ones that need moderate rainfall will not be able to do well because rainfall is in excess. So it's affecting generally the livelihood, and the standard of living is really dropping. Next slide, please. Conflict and migration. Yes, of course. When there is an issue of erosion, flooding, because this thing move from one impact to another. When we have these impacts, you discover that there will be social tension. There will be conflict over scarce resources, internal displacement, forced migration from one community to a more stable community. So people fight, okay, like in Enugu, Ebonyi State, we keep hearing the news of herdsmen against farmers. fighting? What will make herdsmen to move into people's farm? It's because deforestation, industrial activities have displaced them from the normal green land or farm where these cattle are supposed to feed. They now moved to farm, and they're having this conflict between farmers and herdsmen. So it's a result of one of the impacts coming from climate change. Next slide, please. Now, in conclusion, climate change, the impact is so enormous. We cannot say much because of the time given. But it is important we know that it ranges from both agricultural disruption, health risk, because when there is flood, the rain or the water bodies are forced from their original places into houses. What happened? They move with associated microorganisms that are present in the water. In that case, we'll have outbreaks like malaria outbreaks, outbreaks of infection, bacterial infection, viral infection, all these as a result of the aftermath of climate, impact of the climate change. So houses are covered with water, with the organisms that are moving or microorganisms that are moving from the water into the living environment. Again, too, water scarcity, because like last year in 2002 in Bayelsa State, when there's excessive flood, people in the house people were displaced. They didn't have access to health facility. They didn't have access to even drinking water. They didn't have access to food. You know, they urinate, they poo or excrete all the excrete in the same environment, and the water keep moving it. So there will be increased outbreak of infection as a result of the impact of the climate change on our environment. So there'll be water scarcity, and this in all will also impact on the economy of our country. Thank you, and remain blessed.
Thank you very much. Stop sharing. Thank you very much, Chidinma, for the very vivid presentation. And they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you've actually presented the impact in the southern part of Nigeria. And we can see because of the terrain, even though the erosion also occurs in the northern part of Nigeria, but it's more severe in the south because of the nature of the terrain in the southern part of Nigeria. And then almost the same impacts which we witness in the north is also cut across, and that's similar, except for some little differences, and they are exacerbated differently, but then it affects the whole of Nigeria. And with some of the statistics that we have seen, that's probably we can actually do link this to climate change, because it says flooding in Nigeria is likely to be 80 times likely with the impact of climate change. So if there's climate change, definitely, even if we will have flooding, then it will also be affected. Because I have to really rush so that we can catch up with all that needs to be done. Our program will be moving to the next panelist, and that is Diana Rose Oma, the program coordinator from the Horn of Africa. Let me briefly say a little about Diana. Diana Rose Oma is a dedicated program coordinator at the Horn of Africa Youth Network, where she spearheads and she leads the Africa Regional Program. This initiative aims to empower girls and young women, enabling their meaningful participation and engagement in decision-making process across Africa. In addition to her role as program coordinator, Diana serves as the communications and advocacy lead at the Horn of Africa Youth Network. In this capacity, she oversees impactful digital advocacy campaigns and effectively manages the organization's social media presence. Furthermore, Diana contributes as a gender consultant at Youth Senate Kenya, working on a program focused on accelerating the elimination of female genital mutilation, and also with other responsibilities as a dedicated director at the Youth for SDGs Kenya. And she has participated in many programs that actually showcases the youth, and she has a lot of experience in working with youth across Africa, including Tanzania, and she's done this framework of the UNSCR 2250, the Africa Youth Chapter, and the Africa Union Continental Framework on Youth, Peace, and Security. And she has also worked across many other countries in Africa apart from Kenya. That's Uganda, Ethiopia, and also Mali. Her network, in her network, she tirelessly advocates for the rights and representation in national, regional, and global decision making. She has a very rich resume, and I believe that we will benefit from what she will be sharing with us today. Over to you, Diana Rose Uma. Welcome. We are happy that you are able to make it and to join us in this presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I'm sorry my bio is a bit too long, and apologies in advance. I'm not able to share my my video. I've just lost power where I am. It's actually almost 7 p.m. here in Kenya, but I think using my phone, I'll still be able to be audible enough and share my experience working in the climate change space. I think also what my bio doesn't say that I occasionally host a podcast that talks about climate change. So I host young people, experienced leaders to talk about climate issues, strategies, and mitigation. So straight to the Horn of Africa region, I'd just like to start by saying that unfortunately, climate change is a global crisis and a global challenge that really knows no borders. So it's very devastating to hear some of the impacts of climate change in Nigeria, but also just to say that as much as this is happening to Nigeria, it also at some point then starts affecting the neighboring countries. I think from the previous panelists, they've spoken about having internally displaced persons, which also can lead to a point where now people start moving away from their countries in search of spaces where they can coexist, have businesses, start their own families and whatnot. So coming back to the Horn of Africa region, it's really known for its diverse landscape and vibrant cultures, but also the region is facing some harsh and extreme climate crisis that threatens not only its ecosystem, but also the livelihoods and well-being of its people. So I think some of the impacts of climate change has already been listed by the previous speakers, but just to name a few that occur mostly in the Horn of Africa region are the extreme rising in temperatures, prolonged droughts like in countries like Kenya where I live. We have unpredictable rain patterns and extreme weather events. So we have countries like South Sudan who also really experience extreme floods, not as in the case of Nigeria, but also they have some extreme floods that displace their people from point A to point B. And really this can impact our livelihoods in different ways. Someone spoke about the gender dynamics and looking at the marginalized groups that are affected most by climate change. We look at children who go to school. We've had cases where children are not able to go to school because their classrooms are filled with water, or some of them actually walk through water just to access schools. Now, the impacts are even worse for girls or young women, because you find that looking at the sexual reproductive health and the extreme floods or extreme drought where they don't have access to water, this might become a challenge for girls and young women. So I feel like the impacts of climate change, even in the Horn of Africa region, has its own ripple effects. So also in the pastoralist communities, when we talk about drought or lack of access to water, we've had cases where people would migrate from point A to point B, and then you find that the place then becomes overpopulated. The thing is, when you talk about climate change in the Horn of Africa region, it's really not easy to separate it from migration, because you'd find someone from Uganda would move to Kenya, or someone from South Sudan would move to Uganda. So the way they're received in the host country also is not expected to always be positive by the communities where they land in. So in some cases, you'd find that if they're pastoralists, having their livestock in search of pasture and all that, then it causes some tension amongst communities. Could be in internally displaced persons who fight amongst each other. We've had cases of even children having guns, shooting at people and causing some conflicts and war because of resource-based conflict. So over time, we've had now people doing studies, and organizations and even regional economic mechanisms are doing studies on the nexus between climate change and peace and security, looking at, does climate change really cause a conflict, or can a conflict cause climate change? Because again, when you look at countries like South Sudan, when people are at war, the kind of machineries they use, do they have an impact on the environment? Do they lead to environmental degradation? So these are some of the conversations that are coming up now, but some of the facts that we've seen and we've lived through are issues of people fighting over land. You'd find that even the issues of land ownership amongst communities, how easy is it to access or to own land? If you are a person, let's say from Kenya going to South Sudan, how easy is it for you to access or really own land? Even the people from South Sudan themselves. So you find that even this can lead to increase in poverty, because most young people or most women like to farm. So if you don't have access to a place where you can farm, it causes a problem. So as I said earlier, climate change really has a really huge impact, and has ripple effects and different effects on different livelihoods for people. But also, I know that as we're having discussions around the effect of climate change in the Horn of Africa region, but we also have to look at what are the role of young people. I think from my bio, you can tell that I've worked a lot, mostly in the youth space, but also I've been able to see some of the potential that young people have when it comes to having climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. So in an African continent, they always say that we are a young continent. This is because 75% of our population is made up of young people. So this is really a huge demographic that we cannot ignore when we start talking about issues of climate change. But also, as I mentioned, there are those people who are affected most by climate change, and also there are those people who are active in and at the forefront of trying to come up with solutions for climate change strategies. I think the second speaker spoke about him being an activist, first because he was also a victim of his businesses being disrupted by floods and all that. But as you can see, he's not just a victim, but he's actually doing something to either raise awareness and also just come up with policies that can support the people of his community. So I believe that this is actually the role of young people. They're very dynamic agents of change. They're armed with innovation, resilience, and they have deep understandings of their community's needs. So their roles and strategies for adaptation and mitigation are really important, and they should be involved in such kind of conversations for some sustainable and prosperous future. So as much as young people have the innovative solutions that they bring this to the table, But when you look at even issues of water scarcity that I think have also been discussed, you'd find that most young people have projects pioneering water harvesting techniques, and they have efficient irrigation methods in response to unpredictable weather patterns. You'll find that they develop climate resilient crop varieties, they have sustainable farming practices, they embrace renewable energy sources. In my line of work, I've seen different programs and young people, even in the informal settlements, come up with very innovative solutions to climate change. You'd find that they recycle plastics to make ceilings. You'd find that they do some waste management to come up with a community cooker, and they bake things like cake, breads, and sell to people. So this is a way of them making money, being economically empowered, but also in the process, really taking care of the environment and being aware of the climate change that crisis that is existing. So when you talk about even issues of energy, finding a young person to really look at if I do this and use this, instead of using electricity, I could be preserving energy. So young people now are really moving into green jobs, coming up with green solutions in their communities, and also really contributing to this. But I would also want to say that as much as young people really do understand their communities and they can give their innovative solutions, they are also very important and they are catalysts for education and capacity building. So young people, beyond just being engaged at community level, they also need to be present in climate change negotiations, being present in talking about policies. Currently, different countries were coming up with their different national action plan on climate change. So you find that in these kind of processes, how many young people then are involved in such discussions? So you'd find that a lot is happening at community level, but then when you look at the policy level, where young people should then bring in their voices and make sure that these strategies that they have or these solutions that they have are actually captured in policy documents to also guide their government. So I think even when you go to regional or even global conversations on climate change, looking at things like Conference of Parties, the last COP27, and now we're going to COP28. How many African young people are really involved in such kind of discussions? So I think in a nutshell, I would just say that at the Horn of Africa region, different countries experience different impacts of climate change. But also, as I mentioned, climate change is not really unique to one country. It affects everyone. So it has no borders. What affects South Sudan might have an effect to Kenya, could go to Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and countries like that. As I mentioned, as much as Nigeria is going through this and it's very devastating, it shouldn't be ignored to be a Nigerian issue, because then that's an African issue, that's a global issue. One thing that affects one country and really interferes with their livelihood would spread out to other countries as well. And I think that we need really a collective effort and programming when it comes to climate change policies, adaptation, mitigation, and approaches. So I would just want to say in conclusion that the impact of climate change in the Horn of Africa demands a collaborative and multifaceted approach, and the youth should be at the central of these kind of discussions and strategies. So let us all just recognize the uniqueness of involving young people, and also just having that collaborative approach, intergenerational dialogue, because I don't think also young people can do this alone, but also working with the older generations and even experts in this field, working with those who are already having this scientific knowledge, but also drawing from our own indigenous and community traditional knowledges. Some of these things also are not really solved just by science, but you find that even back then, if you look at a decade ago, maybe they used to experience some things like heavy rainfall, droughts, but they had their own ways of mitigating some of these issues. So I think looking at one doesn't mean that you have to dismiss the other. We could involve the young people and the older, but also the people at community level, the indigenous community, because they do have the knowledge that we're looking for. That is all I can share for now because of the interest of time. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That brilliant presentation, and I really learned a lot. And your last comment actually reminded me when we were doing an advocacy about air quality when we had very bad air in Port Harcourt, one of the states in Nigeria. And we were talking to the policy makers, and then we said this one is something that you cannot ignore because we breathe the same air, whether rich or poor, or whether politicians or not. And so that really captured there. So the same thing with climate change is a global one. And it has a ripple effect. It affects everyone. And uniquely to the Horn of Africa about this affecting schooling. I think it also does in Nigeria. It affects because when the schools are flooded, then the children cannot go to school. And then this access to water, access to actually clean water, it's something that goes across. 75% of the young of the population in the Horn of Africa being the young is similar to Nigeria. We have about 60% of the population the young people. If I'll give the floor to anyone who would like to say something before we go to, I have several questions here too. But before then, if we can have anyone say their minds about what we have listened to or any other comments that they would like to make about climate change and the impacts experienced. In the chat box, I have Adoni, I have to share some stats about the Horn of Africa. Yeah, so also some other grim statistics. There's going to climate change made Horn of Africa drought and Mediterranean heat 100 times more likely. So that's something that we need to keep abreast of and watch. And so Hortense, Diana, the Horn of Africa, you may need to look at this document. And then we have also about the African Emergency Management Agency. It says it seems ripe at this time. Working with Howard University to do this is a great idea. Okay, so we are taking all of that on board. Dr. Echinosa, more awareness program like this can stimulate interest in these areas. So organizations like WCAPS should intentionally organize programs to create awareness. Okay. Do you have a permission to move to some of the questions I have? There's a question from Zainab, I think Zainab Bello. I don't know if it's a question or a comment. She says, oh, it's a question. What solutions has been put to stop flooding in Trade Mall? This is Trade Mall is in Nigeria, in Lugbe, in the federal capital city of Nigeria. He says it has been recurring almost every year. Was it that the estate was built on the water path? So I don't know who will be able to answer this question, because for me, I think this question is for policymakers and for the government. What solutions have been put to stop the flooding in the Trade Mall in the Lugbe area of Abuja? Anyone from the Nigeria panel that can ask this? It's not a. I don't think it's a question for.
As you rightly said.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
As you rightly said, I think this goes directly to the policymakers. None of us can answer this question because it has to do with the policymakers.
Yeah. Particularly the federal, the minister of the Federal Capital Territory. This is one of the things that they should be addressing.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, yes. And then we have from Priscilla, she says, what immediate solutions have been put forward on ground to respond to flooding in Nigeria aside activism? This question also, if I can answer that, this question is also for government. Activism is our own side of making government to do the right thing. So some of the things that we are doing here, which is the activism, eyes on the environment, making sure that they're creating awareness is what we can do because we are not government. So, but we can always call on government. Like I said, I gave an example about air quality when there was air pollution, and we went and we spoke to government so that they can take charge, and I gave them advice about what needs to be done. The same thing we can do with with the issues of impact of climate change. We can advocate, we can speak about it, we can let this video of what we have of this session go out there for the policymakers to listen to. And I think that's the much that we can do because we are not in government, and therefore we do not have the power to make those laws. So that's what the answer I would give to Priscilla. If there is any other person with a question, we have like 4 minutes. 4 minutes now before we go to the final words. We would like to hear from the executive director of WCAPS, and then we need to make some announcements. I can't see any other question in the chat box. So yeah. Okay. I think that answers the question, doesn't it? Okay. Okay, I see also Chidima says to overcome climate change, we must reduce emission of the greenhouse gas by embracing renewable energies, change of our lifestyle and practice tree planting. Adonia, do you want to say something about the polls? Okay. Do you want to say something? No?
Sure. There was a poll that went out to all the attendees across the Horn of Africa. How many individuals do you estimate are impacted by the climate crisis? 10% said over 1 million, 55% said over 10 million, and 35% said over 30 million. The correct answer is over 30 million. So across the Horn of Africa, at least 31.9 million people are in urgent need of life-saving and life-sustaining assistance due to the most recent climate crisis.
Thank you. Thank you. I see, Diana, you have your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to also add on something you said about the questions you were receiving of what else can be done or what has been done in response to the flooding in Nigeria apart from activism. As you said, there are policymakers, and then there are also other stakeholders who can push policymakers to do the right thing. So we are those stakeholders, and really activism cannot be seen as a small thing. It has pushed governments and policymakers to actually take action. One of the things that I think really came up when we had the first cases of COVID-19 was how Africa really is unprepared in terms of response whenever we are in a crisis. I think this also cuts across with floods. It's not like you see the floods coming as a common person, but really we should have some early warning systems in place to support in case flood takes place. What then can we do to support our community and also our nations? This could be beyond us in terms of actually putting these policies and the frameworks in place. but everybody, I believe, has a role to play. So if you're an activist, then you also just have to do your due diligence, see what's going on, or really push your government and your policymakers to do the right thing and hold them to account. One of the biggest challenges in mitigating climate crisis is also corruption. We know who the emitters are, but sometimes we really do enable some of the developments that they bring in because of the aspect of money. So I think also having the West dangling money in African nations is not really helping issues of climate change. This really goes back to historical moments. I think also someone spoke about colonialism, which is an actual fact. I think Africans have African solutions to African problems, but the problem again is in leadership. What kind of governments do we have? What kind of policies do we have in place? So as I mentioned, everybody just has a role to play, and we all can't do everything, but you have to do what you can to really try and ignite that change. Thank you. I think that's all.
Thank you very much. Very insightful. I see Abdul Majid, you have your hand up, and thank you, Adonia. It's all collective efforts. Thank you. Go ahead, Abdul Majid.
Thank you, Ma. As she rightly pointed out, activism is beyond the way we see it. If I could remember, sometime around after the election in Nigeria, one of the governors called on me and said, "You are always advocating for environmental sustainability. You are very stubborn. You make us look like stupid. We're not doing anything." He gave me a paper and a pen and asked me to jot down what we feel that we want them to do, and they would do it. And as I'm telling you, most of them are now in action. Most of what I wrote to him. So you see, this activism we're doing, it's a plus, and we can't do everything, but we can do the little we have to do within our own power. So activism, it's the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Do all that you can within your own corner. Yes, and then gradually everything. Because of time, please, I would just have to stop our question and answers on the interactive session here, because I want to call on Dr. Malika Glover to give us some final comments. Malika Glover is the interim executive director of WCAPS, and she will also introduce herself properly because and let us know who she is and what she's been doing. She's behind the climate works and the coming to life of this panel. Thank you. Welcome, Marika.
So all I was saying was that this is wonderful. I'm very proud of the work that the Nigeria chapter is doing. I'm very proud of WCAPS. I'm very proud of everyone here today. And I this was an exceptional panel. A wonderful and much needed conversation with what is going on in Nigeria and other parts of Africa that I think people don't actually know. So I found it very educational, very helpful myself. And other than being very proud of being the executive director of such an amazing organization, the only other thing I will say to introduce myself is I'm a social epidemiologist. I've been an epidemiologist for the last 20 years. I am, my expertise falls in the space of public health and peace and security, and really sort of addressing the institutional and infrastructure issues that lead to this continuation of disparity, and also the cultural norms and really cultural expertise that gets left out of these conversations that is much needed in order to find solutions in these spaces. And so I'm really glad that our speakers brought up issues around sort of leadership, country leadership, and what impact that has on us our ability to make progress. But also more importantly, really sort of the ability to highlight the voices of the indigenous people of these countries, and really they have the answers to their problems. That is a very, very true statement. And I think that as a global entity, we really need to really lean into that. I think for way too long, we've looked to other people for answers, and allowed them to sort of lead the direction that we really know best in order to make the necessary changes. So again, I commend all of you for your work, for your continued struggle in this space, and your just continued dedication to the work that we need to do. And again, I just want to reiterate that I am so proud to be the ED of WCAPS, and I'm very proud of the Nigeria chapter, and as well as our Eastern Horn of Africa chapter, and as well as our climate change working group. So this was wonderful. So thank you all so very much for being here today, and I look forward to all of the amazing things that Robbie and her team have planned for the rest of the year. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Malika. And you've been actually the backbone behind this, and I am very happy that you graciously allowed Africa to be the first region. It's going to be to inform all of you. It's going to be it's regional panels, and then we're going to go through all the regions of the world, global. So we started with Africa. And then, you know, as Africa is, we are going to have 2 panels for Africa. This is the first one. The second one will be coming up in a week's time, and that will have panelists from other panels from other Africa region, not Nigeria this time around, but we'll be there also to give our views. And after that, we're going to do the Asia panel, and then we'll do the South American panel, we'll do the North American panel, and then we're going also doing which one is it? The Indian Caribbean? I keep forgetting this other region. So please do stay tuned, and please the journey with us. Take the journey with us all the way until October. And then within the final recap, which will be a 2-day conference, where we'll bring together everything and then give suggestions for mitigations and adaptations. So these are the things we are going to do in the climate works panel, and we'll give you more information. As we already have our panels for next week, and God willing, we will put everything together again, and I will let you know, and you can join us then. I want to say a big thank you to Renee for joining us and providing the highlights of the climate change working group, the WCAPS climate change working group. Many thanks to our panelists, Chidima and Abdulmajid, the very people I'm very familiar with, and I thank you for accepting to be here and also enriching this panel. And thank you very much. I hope to be able to see you in person one day, Diana Rose, Omar. That was very brilliant, and the Horn of Africa. I really like what is going on there, and I've already met Hortense virtually, and we'll be meeting again in the next panel what needs to be done. This has been a very exciting one, and I think we really did well. And it's just 2 minutes to the ending, so we have actually done justice to our timing. And I just want to thank everyone and to tell you that I really enjoyed this, and I hope to see you next week. And thank you so much, Malika. We have so many other things that will be coming around to ask you for your assistance and for your help and seeing today. Thank you so much. And so bye-bye, everyone.